Hello, and welcome to you all. Thank you for joining the Center for Applied Linguistics today for this 30-minute webinar entitled Digital Equity in Education, Directions for 2022. This webinar is the latest installment of our, latest and last installment of our first year of the series, Research to Policy, Critical Conversations in Language Education, in which we assemble content area experts, researchers, and practitioners to have timely and critical conversations about educating multilingual learners through the lens of digital equity. My name is Keira Ballantyne, and I serve as the Vice President for Programs and Development at the Center for Applied Linguistics. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, experts in their field, who work at the intersection of research, policy, and practice in language education, language access, and equity. We're very lucky to have so much knowledge on one call, and we encourage you, the audience, to ask us questions via the Q&A box below. We'll address as many questions as we can at the end of our discussion today. Also, you may click on the chat button at the bottom of your screen anytime to share your thoughts and comments. And I can see folks in the chat from all over the country. So sure, please go ahead, tell us where you're calling from. We love to hear where you're calling in from. And then just a reminder before we begin, if you could please be sure to mute your microphone now to avoid any interruptions during this presentation. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our guests. Dr. Beatriz Arias is a senior research scientist at the Center for Applied Linguistics in Washington, D.C. Her scholarly interests center on educational language policy and programs for emergent bilinguals and English language learners. Maria Cieslak is a national board certified teacher and the manager for professional development content at the Center for Applied Linguistics. She's trilingual in Polish, English, and Spanish, and she's a former Nevada and Illinois educator and professional developer who has taught kindergarten through 8th grade as a bilingual, ESL, and general education teacher. We only have 30 minutes today, so let's get right to it. Beatriz, let me start with you. At the start of the pandemic, you released a Cal commentary in which you described the poor state of digital equity in terms of the lack of access to broadband, especially among students who are multilingual learners. Since the release of that report in June 2020, what else have we learned about digital equity?
Well, thank you, Keira, for that question. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon with all of you. You know, I wrote about access for emergent bilinguals to the internet, and it became clear that with over 5 million English learners across the country, many weren't having access primarily due to a lack of connectivity. What we've learned in the ensuing time has been that digital equity is complex. It's not just connectivity, because certainly that's a basic part of it. Where are your cell towers? You know, we see that there's very few cell towers on the reservations or in rural areas. But also the strength of your connectivity. Then it's the devices. Do you have the school shared devices, or do you have devices at home with which to access the internet and the content? Are there enough for everybody in your family? And one very critical part was, as we shift from the classroom to home, is who's supervising the children doing the learning. I mean, is somebody there saying, okay, kids, it's time for you to take a break, or, you know, who's keeping track of how long you've been on the computer, or that you're not playing games when your teacher thinks that you're actually attending. So, so parental or some adult supervision is necessary, especially for the younger learners. And then we also learned that the content of the software, especially for English language learners who it's critical to be learning English, the software left a lot to be desired in terms of teaching English, you know, as a second language. I also think that it's important at the other end for teachers to be aware of connectivity issues that may be happening to students in their classrooms. And some districts have done like needs assessments of the students in their districts, just to see who has access, who doesn't, and who's using it.
Thanks so much, Beatriz. So, we're still continuing to see some of those challenges just with students having access, but I want to turn now, Maria, to you, and I want to think a little bit about, when students do get access, what is it that we're doing? What are students doing? And so I wonder if you could help us, tell us a little bit about what we think of these days as digital literacy.
Sure, because there's a distinction between literacy and digital literacy, especially when we're talking about multilingual learners, right? And they're learning English as a second language, third, fourth, or even their fifth language. And so digital literacy or coding is another language that we need to be preparing our students for. Literacy is very linear when we're thinking about reading, left to right, top to bottom. Digital literacy, on the other hand, is linear and non-linear. And that brings another challenge for our second language learners or our multilingual learners. But because it's a challenge, it's not an obstacle. It's a vehicle for us to really transform content and language development simultaneously. And so when we're thinking about digital literacy, it's about giving access to students to material, which is text, now a much broader definition of what a print material would be, because now we're jumping off the page. We have share buttons, we have comment features, we have audio visual, so that multimodality literacy, it's very multimodal. And students have a different perspective with each text. So it's not meant for the text to be experienced the exact same way as if when we were doing a print material. And because of that, the teachers are really also learning how to become not only digital consumers, but digital producers, and asking the students to do the same. And that is really, really critical, because our students are basically digital natives, but because they're digital natives doesn't mean that they are digitally literate or digitally proficient. And the same with our teachers. Some might be digital natives and some might be digital immigrants, but we quickly came together to transform our teaching and learning skills to meet the demands of the 21st century.
And I really liked, you've observed, we're all the way through the first quarter, almost all the way through the first quarter of the 21st century. And it took a pandemic to wake us up into really realizing some of the promise of digital literacy. As you've worked in schools, both virtually and more recently in person, Maria, you've had an opportunity to see some of the amazing things that educators have brought to the table, and some of the really creative ways that educators have responded to the challenges of the last 18 months. What did you see teachers do or learn during the pandemic that we really want to hold on to for the road ahead?
Exactly. So teachers are the best role models and example of 21st century learners, because they were creative, they were collaborative, they were communicating, they were creative, right? And that's what we're expecting our 21st century learners to do. They also were able to be resilient and quickly adapt the materials and move from being consumers to producers. But in order for that to be sustained, it has to be sustainable. So now we can slow down a little bit, because we were reactive in the beginning, and now there's a chance for us to be proactive and continue. During this whole time, Cal and my colleagues, we've been, and other organizations throughout the world, we're providing professional development to teachers. And globally, our teachers stayed after school, before school, worked on weekends, tuned into podcasts, webinars, joined online courses, joined professional organizations to stay at the top of their profession. And so we need to continue supporting them even now as we move forward. in those endeavors.
Absolutely. You know, those teachers, they just showed up. And I can say, as the parent of a child who was a fourth grader in March of 2020, having teachers, you know, in a different environment, but working to make the world as normal as they could for that child, you know, I could just see the commitment that all of the teachers in our communities have to our kids out there, and you know, just so much respect for all of the work that teachers have done. Um, I want to think a little bit now about the policy context, and thinking about continuing both some of those things that we have learned, both the good and the bad, over the last 18 months. We've seen that we do have these digital inequities. We've also seen that there are places of promise where we can use some of the tools that teachers and students have worked together in creating to move us forward. So I'm going to ask you, Beatriz, first. Yeah, if you had a magic wand, what changes in policy would you make to move us toward digital equity for all learners?
Well, I think some of that magic wand work will be addressed by the new infrastructure bill. There's going to be $65 billion just for developing internet connectivity across the country in different places. So that will start to address it. But I would like to see also, with that magic wand, the development of family computer literacy. I think it's really important that we, like we used to have family literacy programs in schools, that we do similarly to promote literacy for families so that they can then help their kids learning in school. And so I would like to see that, and perhaps the broadband will become a utility if we, you know, feel that it is so needed. There's many studies that are saying that people think it should be a utility just like water is. And so that would be quite an accomplishment.
Could you say a little bit more about that, Beatrice? What do you mean by saying broadband should be a utility?
Well, and then in other words, the big barrier for many low-income people is to subscribe to a service that provides you the internet. And so the subscription can range, you know, from, there have been subscriptions that are less expensive, $5 all the way to $75. And those are difficult for families who have scarce resources. So if then it is a utility, then the price of the connectivity would come down. And so you wouldn't have to pay so much to be able to participate on an efficacious network. And so that would be the way that it would work. And this day and age, it seems like everybody needs the internet. It would seem to be logical that we should all have equal access to something that is so basic.
Thank you, Beatrice. Maria, let me pitch the question to you. If you had a magic wand and you were thinking from the policy perspective, what changes would you put into play?
Well, it would definitely go into the recruiting and retaining of teachers with those instructional guides and those coaches, because they're going to be there to support all technologies. So not only the internet access, not only Google Drive, Microsoft, SharePoint, all of those, but podcasts and television, for example. And I see many of our participants from around the world talk about how did what lessons were learned globally. TV was used, radio, the WhatsApp app, our phones, right? The connections went beyond just the internet, because when there was no Wi-Fi, what do we do? And so having our students, our multilingual learner students in those STEM courses are going to be very vital. And in order for that to happen, our teachers need to have a little bit more support in coaching in all of the digital technologies and the different digital frameworks.
Thank you. And I loved the way that you talked about this earlier, Maria, about kids being digital natives, but not necessarily being digitally proficient, and being able to think about the things that, you know, even though kids have grown up in such an online world, that doesn't mean that they don't have additional needs for that specific part of digital literacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Maria.
Oh, so I was just going to add on to that about, our students also have different digital preferences, and so do teachers. And with that in mind, we have to realize that some of our students don't have a digital preference as of yet until they're exposed and have these multiple opportunities. And so some of our students and our teachers are going to be digital avoiders or digital minimalists or even enthusiastic adopters. And we have so many different learning pathways. So I think, 2022 is going to look amazing because now we have so many different options, and it's all about the choice and the voice of our students and our teachers. And so I think it's going to open up some new avenues, new learning pathways, a new enthusiasm for our profession.
I'm going to now turn to some questions in our from our Q&A box, and I do encourage you, if you have questions for our panelists, to go ahead and drop those into the Q&A box. The first question I have is about newly arrived immigrants. How do we introduce students and parents to the digital world when they arrive in the US from a country or a culture where they don't have access to technology? I don't know if
you want to go first?
Go ahead, Maria.
Okay, well, our students are tier 1 students, and so we want to expose them to grade level material. And so if our other students are using technology as part of the everyday learning, then that's what we do. There's great, wonderful learning platforms for our newcomers to be the digital consumer, right? And so they're going to be learning language, English, for example, but not all day long on a computer. We need, right? Learning language and learning content is a very social aspect. And because of that, teachers need to know how to leverage technology and bring in technology at the right time for the right person for their content area. And some content areas are very strong using technologies and others are not because of the discipline. And so we have to be, so when newcomer families come in and students come in, they're going to see they want to do what other students are doing. And so if there's an iPad, we need to know and teach them how to enable the translation features, how to use those auditory features. And the US Department of Education just in 2019 did the first federal study, US study on ed technology with English learners. Translation features are just one small part of features that should be used with our multilingual learners. And so there's a wealth of opportunity to grow in content once we show students, but we do it slowly. We do it one app at a time. We do one feature at a time. We don't want to overwhelm them. And again, it's about that community of learning the discipline, and our oral literacy skills play a very important part in the digital world. And we can use Flipgrid, for example, for students on day 1 to show that they have that positive asset orientation, that they have those funds of knowledge, those funds, like I said, the funds of knowledge to come in to play right away on day 1, even when it's a digital context in a hybrid society.
Beatriz, you want to follow up anything there, or should I pitch another question?
Take another question.
Take another question. So this participant would like to know about what do we know about resources that there are for teachers that are maybe experiencing scarcity in their communities. What resources are there out there that teachers can maybe reach out online and find if they don't have a whole lot of resources where they are? And I believe we're going to send some in our follow-up email, but maybe you can think of some off the cuff as well.
Well, if you don't mind, Beatriz, I'm going to take this one too, because it was with teachers.
Yes.
Each state, our states, every single state education agency put out an amazing plan and submitted it to the federal government, and that those are all online. So make sure that you know, one of the reports, when you go to the digital classroom and you click on resources, the yellow door, there's the ESSER fund tracker. In there, you will see what every state is, how they're going to be using that ESSER money and what kind of supports they're going to be using. So the districts have wonderful resources out there during the pandemic and now after the pandemic. For example, in Nevada, they're creating a new job position called digital engineers, and they're digital ambassadors, and they're going to help navigate through this new world that we are in, which is a wonderful idea. But there also should be an emphasis on our multilingual learners. So yes, all of our learners need the support, but our multilingual learners need a little bit something extra, a little bit more scaffolding, and teachers need that support with that perspective, that lens, when we're creating those professional development opportunities for our teachers.
I wanted to follow up that response there, Maria, and you segued beautifully for me by asking about the kinds of supports the teachers need to move students toward digital literacy. And Beatriz, I wonder if you have any reflections on perhaps what we might see in teacher training in the next several years, and if you think there will be differences in how we train teachers.
Yes, I agree with Maria completely that we need to prepare our teachers and provide them with as much scaffolding and support as possible. I see teacher professional development changing their curriculum to include digital learning and the different kinds of, all the different kinds of digital approaches that there are, so that teachers become much more knowledgeable about what there is. So there will probably be mini certificates coming out on digital literacy or other kinds of certification for special teachers or coaches who are doing that kind of work. I see that happening across the country.
I have another question here, and this again is about resources. The question is, could you give a suggestion on how to maximize using technology in learning, particularly in remote areas where it's difficult to get stable internet connections?
That is a good one. The suggestion that I always give for the teachers who are working in rural areas is perhaps using the podcast, because that is a lower bandwidth, right? And that's a different frequency. And so the app, the WhatsApp was also used in Africa, for example, and in Asia, as well as in rural communities over here in Washington and Oregon, for example, in the United States, in between islands or in between different places. And it's going to be smaller mini lessons, and students are going to then, so it really needs to have short videos. We're talking mini, less than 3 to 5 minutes. We're talking very explicit instruction on how to do things, and then providing those print materials also for home use is going to be important as well. And that's what happened in Africa, where the students receive their textbooks. And same thing over here in the rural communities. The handouts and paper products and books were given to families to use, and then were being returned back to the classroom when needed. And of course, if you can do online, that when you get that little spotty bandwidth that comes in, then you use that, of course. But there should be other options than just fully online.
And I want to add to that, I did see some of that right here in Washington, D.C. We had some schools here that, at the very beginning of moving students to virtual services, did also put a great deal of effort into ensuring that there were paper materials available, because they were recognizing that there were those inequities there.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I'm thinking about too is, don't forget about our families and our parents. They have a wealth of information about many different topics. And that's what parents do all the time. We have conversations with our with our children. And my parents had conversations with me, and they were immigrants from Poland. My mother only having a 7th grade education, my grandfather only 4th grade, because that's as far as you can go at that time for where they were in their generation. But that didn't mean that they didn't know what the world was all about. They knew politics, they knew economics, they knew what was happening socially. They knew they had literacy and strong oral literacy skills as well that helped maintain and helped me grow and kept me going, because they know what it is to persevere in this world, and they're guiding their children to also have those soft skills that are very important in this new world that we live in.
I have a question here. This is a fascinating one. What would you consider the most basic of digital skills, literacy, and citizenship that should be taught as a foundation for students in 2021? What's our baseline look like here? What does everyone need to know?
Okie dokie. Well,
Maria's like, how long do you have?
You know, I talk about this all the time. You know, students really need to know basic keyboarding skills, how to take screenshots, and then digital citizenship, because it's very different what citizenship means, what classroom behaviors and procedures are, and it's not the same in every single country. And so depending on what your country is, you're going to follow what those digital citizenship rules are going to be for those behaviors and attitudes and how to manage the technology.
And I think we have time for one last question. Beatriz, you expressed some concerns earlier about poor quality of some of the digital content for English learners, students. And I wonder, what recommendations would you make to content providers or publishers regarding higher quality materials? What sort of improvements might you suggest?
We received a lot of comments from teachers who want to make sure that the content of the software isn't repetitive. That it's much more interactional if possible, even though it's not maybe a real person that's there. The importance of establishing conversation skills and teaching the rules of engagement that may not be obvious. You know, those are things that need to be looked at closely in terms of the software that's developed. So we need to develop new software to teach English as a partner language. We have a lot of good work for adolescents, I think, and adults. But for young children, I think it's very limited. The market is very limited for teaching English.
Mm-hmm. So some of those more interactive tools that maybe if an older student, an adolescent, has a little bit of you know, the little bit of ability to sit and sit through, but maybe some of those 6-year-olds, that's a little bit of a challenge for them there. Yep. Yep. Well, folks, we are coming to the end of our time. I would like to, first of all, thank our wonderful presenters, Beatriz Arias and Maria Cieslak, for their time today and for their great ideas. I would like to thank our audience for your engagement, for your wonderful questions. I haven't had a chance to look through everything in the chat, but I see a whole lot of really rich engagement there. And then I would like to ask you to please look out in your email. You'll receive an email that will link you to a recording of this event. You're welcome to share it with colleagues, anyone that you think might be interested in listening to this event. We'll also provide you with a list of some resources that pertain to this question of digital equity and digital literacy. And we would very much appreciate if you would fill out the survey that we will send to let us know how we are doing. And I also want to invite everybody to look out for our 2022 Research to Policy series. The details of that will be announced shortly. We're working hard on pulling this series together for you again next year. I think I want to also thank the steering committee for 2021 that worked on this. So that is Lourdes Ortega, Esther de Jong, and Maria Cieslak, who was on the steering committee and contributed to a lot of the vision for these events. And I also want to thank very much Trey Calvin, our communications director here at Cal. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Dziękuję, do widzenia.
Welcome. There's been lots of resources posted on the chat.
Can't wait to read them and put them into my toolbox and to a new Bitmoji.
Thank you.